solve them? How you gon' solve them? When you think of me, you think of a problem. Who, what, when, and how you gon' solve them? How you gon'?
The Elevated Genius.
What's good, people? It's the Elevated Genius, more formally known as Johnny L. Alexander, licensed clinical social worker, therapist, life coach, and therapeutic mentor, and founder and CEO of Elevated Genius Solutions, a strength-based mental health practice in which our whole desire is to help you elevate your genius through mental and emotional well-being. What's good, my G's? For those who tuned into the last episode, thank you and appreciate you. And those who are taking time out of your day, time, wherever you are in the world to listen in, solely and wholeheartedly appreciate you for taking the commitment and going along this journey with me. And so for today's crucial conversation, I want to talk about the topic of resilience. And more importantly, resilience as I had come to learn it initially, and also just my perspective on it now as I've gotten older and gaining a bit more understanding about myself, myself in the context of regards to resilience. So first and foremost, like what is resilience, or how is resilience defined? And basically, resilience is a person's capacity to withstand or recover quickly for difficulties, or a person's proverbial toughness. And so, for myself, when I think about the concept of resilience or someone being resilient, it's just in that regard. It's like what a person had to go through something, and resilience is the byproduct of that thing in which they came through. And so I think resilience is often likened to adversity. A person, experiences an adverse experience, and was able to withstand it and recover from it. So therefore, the byproduct of that is resilience. And for a number of years, that was something that me being resilient was something I took major pride in, because I would say it was on the basis of how I was introduced into resilience, or introduced to the concept of resilience. And that's where the whole aspect of resilience being another word for hustle. And so I was introduced to the concept of resilience right around the time when I was graduating high school from my boarding school, Milton Hershey School. For those of you who know me, know that I went to boarding school in Hershey, Pennsylvania, called Milton Hershey School, where I attended from 8th grade through on high school. And within that school, part of the structure is we lived in households in which we were then monitored or overseen by a set of parents or a couple that we consider house parents. And my house father, Mr. Harper, was an integral part in shaping me as a person, and even to this day, he's still a person I consider like a major mentor for me. And 5 years out of my life, he was a very, very important person to my life, and helped me to get to where I was at the time. And one of the things I always appreciated about Mr. Harper was I feel like as he was shaping us for young men, he was always doing so with the mindset of preparing us for the world. To such an extent that some things that he would do didn't necessarily make sense, and it was flat out just boring, whack, or excessive. One of those things being we used to have to write essays, and the essays were based on our level within our student home. So basically, for those who didn't attend boarding school, some things we do is we would get points per each day based on our chores and our behavior at school and things of that sort. And at the end of the week, you tally up those what are they called? Those points, I guess you can say, and that determined your level. And your level was contingent on what privileges you were able to do, or what restrictions you were on, what have you. And so one thing he did was he made us all write essays, and he was good for giving us books to read, from I think 7 Habits of Successful Teenagers to Rich Dad Poor Dad, The Millionaire Next Door. He was an avid reader, and he's was big on us reading for the sake of expanding our vocabulary, and and our intelligence and things of that sort. And he, there was one time we just asked him why are you having us write essays on a weekend when we're not in school? And he was the whole point of it was to understand the importance of writing. And so I say that all to say is because he was very intentional about the things that he did and he taught us. And I felt as I was graduating high school, he got to the point where I was kind of having one-on-ones. I remember he said to me, he sat me down and he said, in the grand scheme of things, Mr. Alexander, which we hated because he calls by our last name until we graduated. But he says, in the grand scheme of things, Mr. Alexander, he says, when you get out into the world, he's like, to be honest with you, people's not going to care about how you feel and what you've been through, what you've gone through. But I'm not that worried about you per se because you're resilient. And in my mind, resilience is another word for hustle. So he said, because you're resilient, I know that you will end up where you're supposed to be at some point in time. And, and I think that's the time when like resilience became something that was a part of my, sense of identity. Because I struggled for a while with, how I was dealing with and processing the things that I was going through at the time. Which I would come to find like a lot of us kids that were at that boarding school that, came from impoverished backgrounds, and a lot of different histories, were at a very young age trying to like process some difficult things. And one of my roommates, may he rest in peace, Bubba, as we call him, for those who know. I remember one time he came to me, and I don't know if he just felt a sense of like I had this heaviness going on, or like I was dealing with something in particular. But prior to going to boarding school, I didn't really tell to me or talk much about what life was like before boarding school. And so prior to that, I was living in a homeless shelter. I had a mother that was dealing with addiction. And so I was having to navigate a lot of things in the world on my own at a very young age. And the school became a godsend to such an extent that, like, it was by the matter of minutes, it was me ending up in this boarding school and speaking before you now and possibly going to foster care. That's how, my situation was at the time. And, as I might have mentioned in unpacking the wide aspect of like, there's a time I was living by myself and I didn't tell anybody anything, and that kind of helped buy me time to get into boarding school. And so a lot of things I come to know to be normal, or was my norm, I knew wasn't normal when I was at boarding school. And I didn't know how to navigate it. I think I had a sense of understanding that we all had some struggle, so I didn't, really talk about it. But I remember Bubba coming to me one time and he was like, yo, like, at the end of the day, bro, he was like, what you've been through is not your fault. It's nothing to be ashamed of. And I think that's when I started adapting the aspect of, resilience, being that I had been through some things, and I withstand some things that I, was able to recover from, and therefore I prided myself in being resilient. And then when Mr. Harper said it from the aspect of, being another word for hustle, even to this day, like, that still holds true. Like, a lot of my branding, how I interact and engage, how I think the families appreciate me, my transparency, is how I leverage my experiences to help give themselves and their children perspective. And so definitely my resilience is definitely one of my hustles. But it wasn't until late when I realized, resilience had a different side to it, which, consciously I'm aware of, because oftentimes when you think of resilience attached to adversity, it means that you've gone through something, and for a lot of people that is, the potential traumatic event. And I won't speak on it from the aspect of an expert. I think I would like to have someone else come on, the podcast and talk about resilience from a more, more learned and educated standpoint, in regards to trauma, excuse me. So I won't speak to that, but I think, any person can acknowledge the magnitude of how trauma affects us, both mentally, emotionally, and physically, right? But when we look at, resilience being a byproduct of that trauma, it becomes an extension of our identity. So then we take pride in it. And so from, dudes from the streets like, yo, I got it from the mud, to get to where I'm at. And even people from all different walks of life always highlight the struggles and obstacles they've had to overcome to get to their proverbial point of success. And so I think a lot of people, and it's not a bad thing that resilience being an aspect of your identity. I think where the problem lies is when our experiences are just then being disregarded because we're perceived as resilient or the strong one. And then it makes me think of like resilience from the Black perspective. And my understanding came in regards to that because I actually was on an interview, and they're asking me like clinically, like what are the things I like to highlight with the people that I work with and what they're dealing with, and I was like, I always want to emphasize and highlight their resilience, like just what they've been through, what they're going through, even to this point, and finding a therapist and seeking out counseling, I think is a grave side of resilience, and something to be proud for them. But she stopped me and was like, yeah, I hear you, but far too often resilience is weaponized against us, or it's allowed others to disregard our pain and our struggles. And then she spoke of it from a Black perspective, and though it's something that I'm aware of, I didn't never looked at it from that standpoint, because resilience for us is like it's ingrained within our DNA. And so again, mentioning resilience being attached to adversity, and adversity likens to traumatic experiences, and you think about the Black experience in America, and in society. So back to it. So again, looking at resilience from the Black perspective, right? Because when you think about it, it's ingrained within our DNA. Again, reflecting on how resilience can be attached to adversity. Adversity oftentimes has anything to do with, or in some cases, is likened to trauma, or attached to some type of traumatic event. Especially, I think anyone could argue those who consider the most resilient have experienced some means of trauma before, and come through that, and therefore have become resilient. And so when I think about things from the Black perspective, and though I struggle with it and I'm trying my best not to address it, I will lightly speak on the Tyre Nichols situation. Solely because, like, I hope that you listen to the first episode about unpacking your whys, and so part of my whys why I can no longer engage in watching, the myself being murdered over and over again, is because I'm well aware of what it does to me, to such an extent that I physically am not capable of just constantly enduring that and watching that over and over again. And so it's not that I don't care any less, but it literally pains me and costs me something. Because that now when I look at myself as a Black man and sense of identity, I work, I provide, therapy, and I do all the things I'm supposed to, and constantly I'm reminded that my body's not valued in the same manner, right? And the reason why I also don't like talking about these things is because it ends up going through the same cycles, especially with those, with some of my counterparts, some of my colleagues that I consider family that I went to MHS for. I've had a lot of dialogues and conversations as of late, or around Black Lives Matter, police brutality. It always becomes a shit show of dialogue that I'm just to the point now I no longer want to engage in, because we go through the same cycle. So we sit here and watch and see these things happen in front of our eyes. And even after seeing them happen in front of our eyes, people want to deny that to be our reality, because the outrage comes at the person being, to stop being completely unnecessary, or it not needing that level of excessive force, or it needed to escalate to that extent. Oftentimes we see how, a person is being wrongfully detained, and if you as a Black man in particular, or a woman, Black woman, speak to your rights, or decide that, you're not just going to be taken advantage of or bullied, then now you're being non-compliant, you're combative, and now there's, 5 other people jumping on you and ultimately leading to your demise, right? And then after all these things happen, we become outraged, and then part of what we continue here is, well, you guys keep talking about things that happened to you in the past. Now that doesn't apply anymore. Get over it, move on, right? And again, this is just an extension of our common history here in America, that has become an ingrained part of our DNA, and likened to a part of our identity story. Even others, will attribute it to us, even if we don't feel like we're that in ourselves, right? Because the Black experience is not necessarily a monolith, and so not everybody identifies with that level of struggle and resilience that people think just Black people automatically should have. And so that's when I started looking at it from a different perspective. Because I'm like, well, man, like, yes, I pride myself in being resilient and the things that come with it, and I think it's a valuable aspect of a young person's character is how you withstand, hardship and recover from situations. But I don't think that it always has to be founded in that level of struggle. More importantly, being resilient is exhausting, especially when people view as being so resilient that when you actually express how you're feeling, what you're going through, your experiences, your feelings are being denied or invalidated, right? And so with us as Black people, have an extensive history of trauma. We're just always expected to continue to just deal with it and just move on. And that's when it dawned on me about, the double-edged sword of resilience, that yes, it can be valuable in a person's progression in life. But I never sat to process the realization of the cost of being resilient. And so when this, lady had brought that to my attention, my whole perspective about resilience had changed. And then I would start to see in a lot of different areas how resilience then becomes weaponized against us, right? So we talk about, just the Black experience in regards to police brutality and, policing and Black Lives Matter. And then when my wife and I were, planning to have a home birth, and, the research about Black women in healthcare and, mortality rates and infant mortality rates amongst women bearing children in hospital settings, and how it's often likened to their pains, their feelings, their emotions, what they're going through being denied. So a woman literally saying, I'm feeling this, and it's being disregarded or downplayed, or it's nothing, and that is directly linked to this this fetishized aspect of Black people being naturally resilient, that within our DNA we're supposed to be resilient, which then translates to that we're tougher than everyone else, and we can endure more pain, and we're not as emotional or deserving of the same level of respect and emotional regard. And so that's why I think the aspect of resilience is a really crucial conversation, because like I said, for me, I always likened it to my hustle, and it became a sense of my pride. And at a moment in time when I was young, I needed that perspective on resilience because I was still navigating the shame and guilt of my experiences that weren't my fault. But now as an adult, I could then see how, in seeking out therapy for myself and processes this, my different experiences and my different traumas, how sometimes I think people either unintentionally disregard my experiences just because I'm a resilient person. And I think anybody and everyone, especially regardless of how strong they are or will themselves to be, like to be considered and understood, and cared for. And so I think that we have to reassess how we pride ourselves in our resilience, how we cement ourselves in our struggles, especially as Black people, because at some point in time, we don't have to continuously endure this or subject ourselves to that. And I think sometimes we're not mindful about how indirectly, constantly witnessing these things, these atrocities happening to us, desensitizes us, and then that leads to a whole other aspect of hopelessness and desperation, and that's a dangerous combination to have. And I think that's another crucial conversation as well. It's like how then hopelessness and desperation leads to other things within, our community or even from a larger scale.
The Wave Runners.
But that's it, people. A little heavy. I hope I didn't get too much into it. I don't expect these always to be having conversations, but again, the whole aspect of crucial conversations, just important dialogues around things that we need to be discussing, or things that you might be mustering on or dealing with yourself, or perspectives that you didn't necessarily have. So once again, it's Elevated Genius, and we're formerly known as Johnny L. Alexander, licensed clinical social worker, therapist, life coach, therapy mentor, and always remember, elevate, never stagnate. If you like the content, if you like the information, if you have any insights, if you have any crucial conversation you want to talk about yourself, please like and subscribe, hit me up, comment, and just let me know what you all think. Again, crucial conversations, and elevate, never stagnate.